The wind, a relentless sculptor of the desolate plains, had carved the woman down to bone and sinew. Alara pulled the worn shawl tighter, its threadbare while offering little resistance against the biting breath of winter. Her daughter, Lyra, a wisp of a child, clung to her side, a small, shivering anchor in the vast, unforgiving landscape. Days had bled into a blurred succession of hunger and cold since the last semblance of home had vanished like smoke on the wind. The wagon, what little remained of their life, had broken weeks ago, leaving them to walk, to beg, to endure the chilling indifference of every settlement. Hope, a fragile ember, flickered dangerously close to extinction. Their destination, if it could be called one, was merely a name whispered by a sympathetic, weathered face at the last remote trading post. Silas Thorne, a rancher who lived beyond the furthest track, known for his solitude as much as his hard-won prosperity. He needed a cook, the man had said, shrugging, though no one else dared venture so far for such a paltry sum. But for Alara, any sum, any refuge was a lifeline. The silhouette of the ranch house appeared first as a smudge against the steel-gray horizon, slowly solidifying into a squat, sturdy structure of rough-hewn timber, a bastion against the elements. Smoke curled lazily from its stone chimney, a beacon of improbable warmth. As they drew closer, the land became less a wilderness and more a place tamed by relentless effort. Fences, sturdy and new, crisscrossed the snow-dusted ground, containing the unseen promise of cattle. A single figure, tall and unmoving, stood by the corral, watching their approach. Even from a distance, the man exuded an aura of contained power, a stillness that suggested deep roots and an unyielding will. Alara's breath hitched, a knot of dread and desperate hope tightening in her chest. This was it, their last chance. Lyra, sensing her mother's apprehension, burrowed deeper into her side, her small face hidden against Alara's hip. When they were mere yards away, the man finally moved, slowly turning. Silas Thorne. His face was a landscape of sharp angles and weathered lines, eyes the color of a winter sky, appraising and utterly unreadable. A heavy, dark coat clung to his broad shoulders, making him seem even larger, more imposing. He offered no greeting, no smile, simply waited. "Mr. Thorne?" Alara's voice emerged as a hoarse whisper, raw from the cold and disuse. She cleared her throat, forcing a semblance of strength into her tone. "They said, at the trading post, you were looking for a cook." Silas's gaze flickered from Alara to Lyra, lingering for a moment on the child's hunched form, then returning to Alara's face. He didn't speak, didn't nod. His silence was not dismissive, but analytical, as if he were measuring her against some invisible standard. The biting wind whipped strands of hair across Alara's face, stinging her eyes with cold. She clutched Lyra tighter, fighting the urge to fall to her knees, to plead. It was the child's silent presence, her unwavering trust, that gave Alara the backbone she needed. She stood taller, met his gaze, despite the tremor that ran through her weary limbs. "I can cook. I can clean. We can work." The words were simple, direct, devoid of embellishment. They were all she had. A long moment stretched between them, filled only by the whine of the wind and the frantic beat of Alara's heart. Then Silas Thorne finally spoke, his voice low, gravelly, and surprisingly even. "Follow me," he turned, not waiting for a response, and began to walk towards the house. It was not an invitation, but an instruction. Alara exchanged a quick, uncertain glance with Lyra, then stumbled forward, pulling her daughter along. The warmth inside the house was a dizzying assault on their frozen senses, a luxury that made Alara feel lightheaded. The single room was sparsely furnished but meticulously kept, a testament to the man's solitary existence. A roaring fire dominated the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls. He gestured towards a small lean-to attached to the side of the house. "You and the girl will sleep in there. Basic. Food's in the pantry. Start with dinner. Beef stew." He laid out a few simple rules, spoke of wages, meager but consistent, then retreated, leaving Alara and Lyra blinking in the sudden quiet, the heavy scent of wood smoke and old leather filling their lungs. It wasn't a welcome, not truly, but it was shelter. It was a chance. And in this desolate corner of the world, that was more than they had dared to dream of. The air still hummed with the man's presence, an unspoken understanding of the terms. The following days settled into a rhythm, stark and demanding, yet infinitely preferable to the endless wandering. Alara, driven by a fierce need to secure this fragile sanctuary for Lyra, threw herself into the work. The kitchen, though rustic, was well stocked, and the basic ingredients transformed under her hands into nourishing meals. Silas Thorne, her taciturn employer, was a man of few words and precise habits. He ate his meals at the small table by the window, his gaze often drifting out across the frozen plains, rarely meeting hers. Lyra, for her part, remained a shadow, quiet and watchful, never straying far from Alara's side. She helped where she could, her small hands surprisingly deft with simple tasks like peeling vegetables or sweeping the floor. Silas observed them, Alara knew. She felt his quiet presence, a weight in the room even when he was silent. It was not a hostile gaze, but one of measured assessment. He noticed the way Alara flinched instinctively at sudden loud noises, the subtle widening of her eyes when he moved too quickly. He noticed the almost imperceptible tremor in Lyra's hands when she held a knife, a tremor that vanished once she focused on the task. One afternoon, while Alara was kneading dough, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows, a patch of mottled, discolored skin on her forearm caught his eye. It was old, faded, but unmistakable, the twisted lines of a burn or a deep bruise that had healed badly. He said nothing, his gaze merely pausing for a beat longer before he turned back to sharpening an axe. Later, as Lyra reached for a pot on a high shelf, her sleeve rode up, revealing a similar, though smaller, mark on her delicate wrist, an angry red line that snaked under her sleeve. Silas, leaning against the doorframe, missed nothing. He was not overtly curious, but his observations were like a silent, meticulous accounting. He saw the way Alara's hand would instinctively reach for Lyra if the child was out of her sight for even a moment. He noticed how Lyra, though quiet, was never truly still, her gaze constantly sweeping her surroundings, a tiny creature perpetually braced for flight. Their scars were not just etched on their skin, but in the very fabric of their movements, their guardedness, their profound caution. Alara, for her part, slowly began to piece together a picture of Silas Thorne. He was fair if demanding. He paid on time always. He never raised his voice. He left them to their own devices, respecting their quietude. Small, almost imperceptible kindnesses began to emerge. A fresh hair, dressed and ready, left on the porch without a word. A mended latch on the lean-to door. A brand-new, sturdy pair of boots for Lyra, left anonymously by her cot. These acts, wordless and unexpected, chipped away at the hardened shell Alara had built around her heart. She had expected cruelty or, at best, indifference. She found a silent, watchful competence that felt, strangely, like a form of protection. One bitterly cold evening, a stranger rode up to the ranch, his horse kicking up snow as he pulled to a halt. Alara was at the window, watching the last slivers of twilight fade. The man was burly, his face obscured by a thick beard, but there was something in his aggressive posture, the way he dismounted with a swagger, that sent a prickle of ice down Alara's spine. He was dressed like a drover, but his eyes, even from this distance, held a glint of predatory intent. Silas stepped out to meet him, his tall frame a stark silhouette against the fading light. Their conversation was low, murmuring, punctuated by the wind's howl, but Alara could feel the tension, a taut wire stretching between the two men. The stranger gesticulated wildly once, his arm sweeping in a dismissive arc. Then he pointed directly at the house. At them. A cold dread seeped into Alara's bones. This was it, the past arriving on horseback. The moment Silas stepped back into the cabin, the cold seemed to follow him, tangible and sharp. He moved to the hearth, his back to them, stoking the embers. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Alara held her breath, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Lyra, curled on a stool by the fire, watched her mother with wide, knowing eyes. They both understood. The silence stretched, elongated by the crackle of the fire and the insistent whine of the wind outside. Finally, Silas turned, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on Alara. "That was Elias Cole," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. "He claims you owe him. Says you left town with property he claims as his." Alara's world tilted. Elias. The name was a blight, a dark stain on her memory. Her former husband, a man whose casual cruelty had been a suffocating weight. The scars on her skin, on Lyra's arm, were his legacy, etched by his drunken rages and possessive fury. She had fled with nothing but Lyra and the clothes on their backs, barely escaping with their lives, certainly not with his property. "He lies," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her efforts to control it. "He claimed everything. He beat me. He hurt Lyra. We left to survive." The words tumbled out, raw and unguarded. The truth she had guarded so fiercely now exposed to this silent, watchful man. Lyra instinctively buried her face against Alara's side, her small body trembling. Silas's gaze sharpened, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. He looked from Alara's pale, defiant face to Lyra's shuddering form. He had seen the marks, yes, but the story behind them, the depth of their suffering, was now laid bare. "He says he's coming back tomorrow, with men, to take you back." And the girl, his voice was still calm, almost unnervingly so, but there was an underlying current of steel that made the hairs on Alara's arms prickle. A desperate, animalistic fear seized Alara. There was nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. "Please, Mr. Thorne," she pleaded, the words raw, tearing at her throat. "We have nothing. He is a cruel man. He will break us." Silas was silent for a long moment, his eyes scanning the room, as if seeing beyond the rough timber walls, out into the vast, indifferent landscape. Then he moved, not quickly, not dramatically, but with a quiet, deliberate power. He walked to the old gun rack by the door, took down a Winchester rifle, and began to clean it with slow, methodical movements. The metallic click of the lever action, the whisper of the cleaning cloth against cold steel, were the only sounds. He didn't look at Alara, didn't offer a word of comfort or assurance. He simply prepared. The following morning dawned cold and clear, the air brittle with frost. Alara worked in the kitchen, her movements stiff with dread. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, sent a jolt of terror through her. Lyra sat huddled in a corner, clutching a wooden doll Silas had carved for her weeks ago, her eyes wide and fixed on the door. Around mid-morning, the distant thud of hooves on frozen ground reached them. 3 riders, not 2. Elias Cole and 2 hulking men rode up to the ranch, their faces grim, their intent clear. Silas met them outside, standing alone on the porch, the Winchester held loosely in one hand. He was a sentinel, unyielding. Elias dismounted, a sneer twisting his features. "Thorne," he spat, his voice crude and menacing. "Heard you got my runaways. Send them out. They belong to me." Solara, hidden with Lyra at the window, watched, her heart in her throat. She saw Silas take a slow, deliberate breath. "They're not yours, Cole." Silas's voice was low, resonating with an authority that seemed to quiet even the wind. "They're under my protection now." Elias laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Protection? You think you can stand against 3 of us, Thorne? I'll take what's mine, and what's left of you won't be worth burying." He started to move towards the porch, his hand drifting towards the pistol at his hip. The movement was barely perceptible, a blur of motion. Silas did not raise his rifle. Instead, his free hand, lightning quick, reached out and snatched a small, sharp piece of rock from the ground by his foot. In a single, fluid arc, he flicked it. It spun through the air, a dark speck, and struck Elias's gun hand with a sickening crack. Elias cried out, his pistol clattering to the frozen ground, his fingers bent at an unnatural angle. One of his men lunged forward, but Silas had already moved, his rifle now leveled, aimed not at the man, but at a post directly behind him. The shot cracked, deafeningly loud, splintering the wood inches from the man's head. The air immediately filled with the smell of gunpowder. The other two men froze, their faces pale. Silas lowered the rifle slightly, his gaze cold as ice, sweeping over them. You touch this ranch, you touch these people, and you will not leave here standing. Understand? His voice had dropped to a dangerous murmur, a promise of swift and brutal retribution. The second man, seeing Elias clutching his broken hand, the cold, lethal resolve in Silas Thorne's eyes, visibly swallowed. He knew. They all knew. This wasn't a man to be trifled with. Elias, his face contorted in pain and rage, stumbled back, his eyes darting from Silas's unmoving figure to his broken hand. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. This was not a negotiation. This was an absolute declaration. The three men, beaten not by bullets but by a demonstration of lethal control, turned their horses and rode away, leaving nothing but dust and the faint scent of fear in their wake. Alara watched them disappear, a slow, disbelieving breath escaping her lips. Lyra, no longer trembling, looked up at her mother, then back at the door where Silas still stood, a quiet, formidable guardian. He had not merely protected them, he had redefined their world. The quiet that settled over the ranch after Elias Cole's departure was profound, a stillness born of resolution rather than mere absence. Alara moved through her duties with a newfound lightness, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The fear, so long her constant companion, began to recede, replaced by a tentative sense of peace. She still flinched sometimes, a reflexive spasm of old habits, but less often. Lyra, too, shed some of her shyness, her small, clear voice occasionally breaking the kitchen's quiet with a question or a murmured observation. She even ventured outside, exploring the immediate area around the house, always within sight of her mother or Silas. The town, when word eventually trickled back, whispered. Silas Thorne, the solitary rancher, had broken a man's hand and faced down 3 armed men for his cook and her child. It was a story that defied easy explanation. Some said he was a madman, others a fool. But no one doubted the truth of the outcome. The consensus slowly shifted from outright condemnation of Alara to a grudging respect, or at least a healthy fear of the man who stood by her. Elias Cole, humiliated and injured, made no further attempts. The town never forgot what Silas Thorne did next. It redefined him in their eyes, and in doing so, granted Alara and Lyra a shield they had never known. For Alara, the confrontation had been a searing crucible. She had seen Silas not just as an employer, but as an unlikely protector, a silent force against the world's indifference. The scars on her skin remained, but they felt less like a mark of shame and more like a testament to survival. The emotional scars began to heal, a slow, gentle mending, fostered by the quiet security of the ranch. She found her own strength not just in surviving, but in living. She baked bread with a renewed vigor, tending the small kitchen garden in the warmer months, her hands calloused but capable. She began to teach Lyra to read from the few salvaged books Silas kept, the words a new kind of freedom. The relationship between Alara and Silas remained unspoken, a tapestry woven from shared moments and quiet understandings. He would often find her working late, or sitting by the fire with Lyra, and simply offer a nod, a silent acknowledgement. He'd leave small gifts, a perfectly sharpened knife for the kitchen, a brightly colored ribbon for Lyra's hair, a wild flower picked from the distant hills. It was not a romance in the conventional sense, but something deeper, more profound. A partnership forged in adversity, a quiet, resilient family built on the bedrock of respect and mutual unspoken needs. He needed her competence and the warmth she brought to his solitary home. She needed his steadfast protection and the quiet sanctuary he offered. One evening, as twilight painted the plains in hues of purple and gray, Alara watched Silas returning from the far pasture, his silhouette etched against the dying light. He moved with the same quiet strength, the same grounded presence. Lyra, who had been drawing in the dust with a stick, ran to meet him, holding up her crude drawing of a horse. Silas knelt, a rare, soft smile touching his lips as he admired her art. Alara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling as deep and steady as the earth beneath them. They had found their place. Not a grand house, not a life of ease, but a quiet, hard-won existence built on resilience and the unexpected kindness of a man who saw not what was owed, but what was due. Dignity, safety, and a chance to finally, truly live. The wind still howled, and the world outside remained harsh, but within the walls of that sturdy ranch house, a new beginning had taken root, strong and enduring, like the ancient, silent mountains that guarded their horizon.